Hello everyone, welcome back to another one of John's never-ending list of random things to do. For today's video, I will be working on my 1985 Toyota Celica Supra. The issue here is, whenever the engine is cold, it doesn't fire up right away. It usually takes me 6 to 8 cranks while lightly pressing the gas pedal just to start. But once the engine gets started and I drive it around to warm it up, when I shut it off and go back to fire it fires up right away. Now I will assume your fuel system and your ignition is in good working condition. So the two key pieces that will help you start your engine while it is cold is your cold start valve and the thermal time switch. I will show you how to diagnose and replace these items. To get to the cold start valve, you have to remove the intake pipings. Now the cold start valve is located right here. You have to remove this connection. Using a pick or whichever tool you have available, take your time to remove this retainer, and once you have it removed, go ahead and pull it off from the cold start valve. Since I had spare speaker wires sitting around, I'll be connecting these to the cold start valve. In this location, right next to your airflow meter, if you look down, you'll see this yellow connection. You'll want to make a connection between these two pins. This will allow us to turn the fuel pump on without trying to start the engine. From here, just turn the key to the on position. Now all you have to do is open the throttle body. I'll be placing a pair of pliers in the back just to keep it open. According to the TSRM, all you have to do is apply voltage, but since the voltage isn't indicated in the TSRM, I went on ahead and applied 12 volts. So here are some things you are looking for. Did your cold start valve click? And if it clicked, did it spray? If it clicked and didn't spray, that means your cold start valve is clogged. All you have to do is remove it and clean it out. In my case, it didn't click and it didn't spray. So my cold start valve is probably bad. So let's go ahead and remove it. But before I get to the cold start valve, I remember I was leaking fuel in this area. If you remove this cap from the fuel pressure pulsator, you'll see a little screw. I've already tightened this screw, but it didn't help. So this has to be replaced using a 22mm crowfoot. Before attempting this, I turned my key to the off position. Now I placed the crowfoot in position, broke this banjo bolt loose, then removed it completely. There's a copper washer located at the top side and the bottom side. It's good practice to replace these as well. Here's an aftermarket replacement part, but if you wanted to keep everything original, here's the part number you're looking for. And a quick shout out to Mark, who helped me find this interchangeable part number. Now before installing anything aftermarket, it's best to place it side by side with the original piece to see if everything matches. Now the aftermarket banjo bolt came with its own washers, so I will be using those instead. Now one is placed underneath, and one is placed on top. Go ahead and thread it in by hand as far as you can. Then snug it down. Now turn the key back to the on position. Then check to see if there are any fuel leaking in this area. In this case, nothing is leaking, so I'll go ahead and turn my keys off and continue on with my cold start valve. Instead of removing the entire plenum, I'll go ahead and just remove the throttle body, so start by removing this hose here. Now if you're not good at reading diagrams, you'll want to take a picture of this area before you start taking off these hoses. Go ahead and remove the throttle linkage here. Remove this connection from the TPS. Then remove these two cooling lines. Since we're introducing air into the cooling system, we'll have to burp the air out later. From here, completely loosen the 4 12mm bolts. And with those 4 12mm bolts completely loose, grip the throttle body like so and just pull it off. If you can break your 14mm banjo bolt loose here, then good. In my case, it was completely stuck. So I had to remove this banjo bolt on this side. Go ahead and completely remove it, and keep track of your copper washers. Now the last two 10mm bolts that are holding this cold start valve in can be removed. This cold start valve is ready to be removed. Some of you might be wondering, is there enough space to pull this out? Let's find out. And there it is, it's out. So here's a quick look at my cold valve tip. It doesn't look too bad. So it's not clicking and it's not spraying. That leads me to believe this cold start valve is dead. Now taking a look at some of these old gaskets, they look pretty good, but I'll be replacing them. I'd rather do the job right the first time. So use any scraping tool of your choice and scrape off as much of the gasket as possible. So here's the final check for the cold start valve. According to the TSRM, the resistance should measure between 3 and 5 ohms. My cold start valve resistance was about 4.5 ohms. After some investigation, I found the internal of this cold start valve was clogged and dried beyond all repair. Now to remove the fuel line from the cold start valve, you need a 14mm wrench and a 14mm socket. Now these injectors are completely discontinued. You can't find them from Toyota or any auto parts store. You might get lucky at the junkyard and find it from another Toyota, but I reached out to Bob, who gave me a very good price. I'll leave a link to his Facebook page in the video description below. And here's the cold start valve he sent me. Since I wanted to do this job once, I sent the new cold start valve to RC fuel injection to get cleaned. While waiting for the cold start valve to get back, I worked on getting these gaskets. Here's the part number for the throttle body gasket, but the cold start valve gasket seems to be discontinued. So I'll be making my own gasket using this gasket material. All I did was make a trace of my old gaskets. Since half of this gasket was broken, I traced half of it first, then flipped it over and traced the other side. Now comes the fun part, cutting out all the holes. Just take your time and make sure your razor is sharp. For these smaller holes, I found it easier to just use a hole punch. Here's a test fit on my old cold start valve. Now go ahead and cut out the gasket for the throttle body. The outside can be trimmed using a pair of scissors. And for the smaller holes, once again you can use the hole punch method. But one punch won't make a hole big enough, so you have to work your way around. Now for the cold start valve, you want to grab 4 of these copper washers. 2 will be used in this location, one on the bottom and one on the top, and this is only if you removed it. Go ahead and screw it down, then snug it down. I finally received the cold start valve back from RC fuel injection. I was also given a flow sheet before and after the cleaning, and here are the results. Now it's time to unpack this cold start valve. It looks a lot cleaner than before. Let's go ahead and install it. The rubber glove is to keep contaminants and spiders out. Now you'll want to completely skip this step. I just did this to show you how it works. With the cold start valve connected, I just snugged it down. Now with the jumper still connected, turn the car to the on position. At this point in time, I had already made my own jumper. With the push of a button, let's see if it works. Alright, that's a fine spray. Now the reason why you didn't have to do this is because now you have to take it off. From here, install the cold start valve with the new gasket. And if you look closely, there's so much space in here. Start the 2 10mm bolts by hand, then snug them down. Now the banjo bolt with 2 new copper washers can be installed. Start it by hand first, then snug it down. Now would be a good time to make the connection to the cold start valve. With our jumper still in place, turn the car to the on position. Now check to see if there are any leaks. In this case, nothing's leaking, so let's proceed. The throttle body with the new gasket can be reinstalled. Place it in like so, then start the 4 12mm bolts by hand. Then snug them down in a cross pattern. Now would be a good time to make the connection to the throttle position sensor. These vacuum lines can now be plugged in. And don't forget these coolant lines. Remember, since we introduce air to the cooling system, we have to burp the air out. Now don't forget to connect the throttle linkage. Now the intake piping and the rest of these hoses can be reinstalled. With the cold start valve done, go ahead and remove this jumper. Let's see if this engine will fire up on the first crank. Looks like it's not firing up on the first crank. Since the cold start valve is good, it's time to investigate the thermal time switch, which is located here. You'll want to remove this retainer using a pick or a tool of your choice. Now at this time, I didn't know the TSRM was incomplete. I only took measurements from STA to STJ and STA to ground when the engine was cold. Before starting, you'll want to measure the internal resistance of your multimeter. With the engine cold, here's the reading between STA and STJ. Comparing that to the reading we're supposed to get according to the TSRM, we're off. Now with one end connected to STA and the other on ground, this is the reading that I'm getting. Comparing that to the TSRM chart, this reading is good. Now one of the main pieces is to take the measurement between STJ and ground. When the engine is cold, you should get a resistance of 0 or something close to 0, using a 23mm deep socket. I went ahead and removed my thermal time switch. Now it completely threaded out, but the shaft was still stuck inside the hole, so I fitted a wrench behind it and unscrewed it while pulling the wrench. You want to make sure this surface is clean. And here's the replacement part. Into the hole it goes. Tighten it by hand, then snug it down. With the engine still cold, the resistance reading between STJ and STA is about 30 ohms. The reading from STJ to ground is about 0 ohms, because the internal resistance of my multimeter is about 0.5 ohms. And the reading from STA to ground is about 30 ohms. Now go ahead and make this connection right here, and with fingers crossed, let's see if this engine starts on the first crank. Alright, this is looking good, but we're not done yet. While the cooling system is still cool, now would be a good time to open the cap and bleed out all the air. This is usually a 15 to 20 minute process. Once all the air has been burped out, go ahead and add some more coolant, then cap it off. Now that we have the engine warm, I'll go ahead and measure the resistance between STA and STJ, and I'm getting a reading of 52 ohms. Now I'll take the measurement from STJ to ground, and I'm getting a reading of 122 ohms. Now I'll take the measurement from STA to ground, and I'm getting a reading of 70 ohms. So if you take the measurements of your thermal time switch, and the numbers aren't close to these numbers, it's probably time to change it. Now cold starts are no longer an issue. On the very first crank, it fires right up. I hope some of you found this video helpful. If you did and you liked it, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys for the next random project.